Comedy, on the other hand, is the concept of you have something that begins pretty happy, it's good, it has a downturn, and eventually throughout the course of the story, it actually comes all the way back up to its happy place again. All right? You even have one called the tragicomedy. Yeah, tragicomedy. And that one is what seems like a massive, we're going downhill fast. Okay? It seems ultimately tragic, but at the end, all of a sudden, we have the higher ending than we could ever imagine. That was the tragicomedy that was mentioned in chapter 2. And so, can you give me some stories that fall either into tragedy, comedy, or even tragicomedy? Give me another tragedy. A story that falls into tragedy. Romeo and Juliet is tragedy. All right? As much as you think it's a beautiful love story, it has really pretty music.
It's not comedy.
It's not comedy.
Tragedy?
Which one?
Castaway.
The Castaway?
Shakespeare, right?
Tragicomedy.
Because,
I'm going to absolutely say it's tragedy.
yeah.
All right? Because what's the whole point? What is he trying to do the whole time?
Get home to his woman.
Get home to his wife,
Yeah.
his life, right? And he shows up at the end. He's rescued, so you think, hey, maybe it's comedy. He's rescued, and he gets there,
And she's married.
Yeah.
and she looks, and they both look at the little boy. And you have that moment. Did he just miss his whole life? And he walks away. She runs out of the yard, hugs him goodbye. She's not going to leave her life. It's the only father he's ever known. And he comes to a crossroads, looks around, and decides where to turn. A life wasted, that's a tragedy. That's a tragedy, a life wasted.
In the end, he looks for one side and the other side. You think he can, like, say, I can start it?
I can start again.
Yeah.
Absolutely. And some of those have some sort of hopeful ending. Romeo and Juliet did the same thing. It is a tragedy,
Yeah.
right? I mean, you have these young people who are in love. There is a secret wedding. There's beautiful music, right? There's this beautiful opera that goes along with it. I mean, they have this beautiful love story. They're madly in love. And, you know, they're young. They're stupid. They both die. And at the end, it has achieved its goal. The exposition of Romeo and Juliet, and it's the perfect time to talk about it, we mentioned it before, the exposition of Romeo and Juliet is the two families having a blood feud. At the end, blood feud is solved. It took the death of two teenagers to do it. That's why it's a tragedy. But it did come around and actually solve the exposition of the story. What would be a comedy? Anyone?
Midsummer Night's Dream.
Midsummer Night's Dream. That one is another Shakespeare perfect. And Aaliyah can bring this one home. She loves, this is her favorite. So you have, at the beginning of the story, two mythical, you have the queen of the fairies, of the nymphs. You have her husband. She has a wandering eye. He doesn't like that so much. And so he gets his sidekick to go and find this magical flower. And while everybody's sleeping, because he is a comic, he makes mistakes. And so he goes and he sprinkles the fairy flower dust on this individual, on the queen. And so whoever she sees when she first awakens, that's who she's going to fall in love with. And she falls in love with someone who has been turned into a donkey. Okay? Yes. And then you have, but before he actually even gets to her, he does somebody else, and mistakenly, there is this huge love square. So all of a sudden, this person who was in love with that person, but she was running away from this person, all different people fall in love with each other in the story. And it's hysterically funny. And at the end, they're going, here, we have to do this over again because we already messed up. And at the end, you have the queen waking up from her dream, realizing, I had the oddest dream that I was in love with a donkey. And he leads her off into the wood. How funny, my dear. And he takes her away, letting her tell his story. And all of a sudden, her ways are changed. Now, in this story, all the people you actually want to get together, and all the people who are saved from the unfortunate marriage or the tragic love lost from far away is beautifully resolved. And that what makes it a comedy. We started off happy, we had a downturn, and we come up to a beautiful conclusion where everything is good in the end, and you bid farewell to Noble and Comic Puck. Wouldn't it be a tragicomedy? A one that has a massive downturn, starts off beautifully, has a massive downturn, almost like this is going to be a tragedy. It's so horrendous. And it keeps getting worse and worse until the ultimate climax is the worst moment. And then when you can't get any worse, all of a sudden it rises from the grave for a beautiful ending. Tragic comedy. Your book mentioned one that every single one of you know. The Bible. The Bible starts off creation. In the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth was formless and void. And let us make man in our own image. And he walked with them in the cool of the garden.
Beautiful.
And then
The serpent.
the serpent comes.
Dun, dun,
Will
dun.
God really do that to you? And so she takes of the fruit, and then you have, it gets from bad to worse. You have a woman who disobeys and a husband who disobeys.
Dun, dun, dun.
Then you have the first murder. You can't have two kids in a household without fights. In this case, you couldn't have two kids in a garden without them, one of them killing the other. Well, they're actually outside the garden at this point, but you get my meaning. There's only 2 siblings on earth so far, and they couldn't make it. So your kids are doing pretty good right now. Then you have, it goes from one murder to a guy who's boasting of multiple murders and assaulting boys. And then you have the destruction of the world by flood, save one family. You're thinking, okay, this is pretty bad. Then you have a little reprieve. You've got Abraham and Isaac, Jacob and Joseph, okay? But any of you who've gone through Judges, you're like, can this get any worse? Especially by the end of Judges, you're like, oh, please close the book. This is getting really disgusting. And then you've got Ruth, and so that's a little reprieve. But then you get to Jesus, and you're thinking, okay, we're doing better. But then you've got Judas, and here comes the kiss, and down to the whipping and the scourging and the shaming and the cross. And your hero of the whole Scripture is crucified unjustly. And just when it seems it can't get any worse, all of a sudden the resurrection and the climax of your story. So Jesus rises from the dead, bringing new life and salvation. And it ends with the greatest imaginable, not just in a garden, but in a garden reminiscent of that beginning, right? In the time when you are with God personally, forever with Him, with no sin and no death. There's even, it talks about that tree of life. And we should actually see in Revelation those same images from the garden. And so we have this story that the Bible is a comedy. It starts off so beautiful, and it slips further and further and further down to when you think maybe this is a tragedy after all. But then the cross leading us to heaven. And there we have the ultimate beautiful place as we're with God forever. And isn't it funny how God saves us funny little creatures with skin on? Think about our own lives. Sometimes, maybe on Mondays, like today, you start to feel like some of it's a tragedy when you have to get up and go to work. Or when you're dealing with your teenagers. Or the 3-year-olds, depending on where you're at in your stage. And then you have these beautiful moments when you're reminded, it doesn't matter how many of these downturns, God has written my story. And He's written me a beautiful ending. In fact, we're really, truly the only story that is happily ever after.
Yes, very good.